The engines went silent. The 300-ton jet became a glider over the Atlantic. Then, the flight attendant ran, not to the cockpit, but to a beautiful woman in seat 8A. And everyone thought he was insane. Transatlantic Air Flight 582 was a world unto itself, a sealed capsule of engineered tranquility hurtling through the stratosphere. 7 hours from JFK to London Heathrow, suspended between the deep blue of the Atlantic and the endless black of space. Inside the business class cabin of the Boeing 777, the atmosphere was one of hushed luxury. The lighting was a soft, ambient gold, the air hummed with a low, consistent thrum, and the clink of crystal glasses was the loudest sound to be heard. In seat 8A, Isabella Rossi was an island of serene detachment. To the casual observer, she was a masterpiece of visual composition. Around 40, with the kind of bone structure and poised aura that models spend careers trying to emulate. A cascade of dark hair was elegantly pinned back, revealing a face that was both striking and unreadable. She wore a tailored silk blouse the color of a deep sapphire, its fine material hinting at the powerful, S-shaped curves beneath. Across her chest, the blouse was drawn taut, its buttons holding a delicate tension over her ample, E-cup bosom, a detail that did not go unnoticed. Paired with bespoke trousers and elegant leather loafers, her entire presence screamed wealth, privilege, and a life lived far from mundane troubles. She wore no makeup, save for a hint of lipstick, and her only accessory was a slim, classic timepiece. She hadn't glanced at the in-flight entertainment screen once. Instead, she held a physical, leather-bound book of classical poetry, her long fingers tracing the lines of a verse. She seemed entirely absorbed, a woman out of time, preferring the printed word to the digital glow that captivated everyone else. This quiet, almost intimidating elegance was a subject of speculation. 2 rows ahead, in seat 6B, a man named Todd, his tie loosened and his cuffs bearing the logo of a major Wall Street firm, nudged his colleague. "Get a load of 8A, he murmured, his voice a low cocktail of arrogance and gin. 10 to 1 her husband is in first, paying for the view. She hasn't moved a muscle since takeoff except to order sparkling water. Trophy wife, for sure." His colleague, Josh, chuckled in agreement, their judgment as swift and superficial as a market fluctuation. They saw the silk blouse, the perfect figure, the air of detached beauty, and their minds filled in the rest of the story with tired stereotypes. They saw a woman defined by her appearance, a beautiful object to be observed. They didn't see the way her head tilted, almost imperceptibly, when the first sign of trouble arrived. It wasn't loud. It was a sharp, metallic pop that seemed to come from deep within the aircraft's soul. It was just loud enough to cut through the cabin's hum, making a few passengers look up from their movies. Most dismissed it as turbulence or an ice chunk hitting the fuselage. But Isabella felt it differently. She felt it not as a sound, but as a change in frequency. A deep, discordant vibration began to transmit through the cabin floor, a tremor so subtle it was more a feeling than a physical shake. It was a wrong note in a perfectly composed symphony. Her fingers, which had been resting on the page, froze. Her posture, already perfect, became rigid. With a slow, deliberate motion, she closed the book of poetry, the soft snap of its cover echoing the earlier, more sinister pop. She removed her designer sunglasses, folding them and placing them carefully into their case. For the first time, her eyes were fully visible. They were not the soft, dreamy eyes of a poet or a pampered wife. They were the color of dark, polished steel, sharp, analytical, and utterly, terrifyingly alert. She stared straight ahead, at the bulkhead, but her focus was elsewhere, listening to the secrets the wounded machine was telling her. The calm had been broken, and in the silence that followed, only she seemed to understand that the storm was already upon them. The world ended quietly at first, then all at once. The subtle vibration Isabella had detected escalated into a violent, gut-wrenching shudder. The starboard engine, a marvel of modern engineering hanging under the massive wing, died with a choked, grinding groan. The lights in the cabin flickered once, twice, then plunged into a terrifying darkness, instantly replaced by the ghostly, sterile green of the emergency floor lighting. The Boeing 777, now grotesquely imbalanced, lurched violently to the right. A collective scream tore through the cabin as the plane fell out of its smooth trajectory, dropping through the sky like a stone. Crockery smashed in the galley. Laptops and champagne flutes became projectiles. Before the initial shock could even register, the second engine on the port side began to sputter, its desperate, coughing rhythm a death rattle that promised total failure. An automated, eerily calm voice filled the void. "This is an emergency. Place the oxygen mask over your nose and mouth." From the ceiling panels, yellow masks dropped down, swaying like macabre puppets on their plastic tethers. The hiss of flowing oxygen was a terrifying counterpoint to the rising chorus of human panic. A child was wailing, a raw, piercing sound of pure fear. From the cockpit, the voice of Captain Marcus Thorne crackled over the intercom, strained and breathless. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing significant technical difficulties. We have lost, we are attempting to." The transmission cut out, leaving only the horrifying sound of the wind screaming over the fuselage. Chaos reigned. But amidst the bedlam, one figure moved with unnatural purpose. David Chen, the senior purser, unbuckled himself from his jump seat with a sharp, practiced motion. His face was a pale, sweat-sheened mask of dread, but his eyes were locked on a single target. Passengers, fumbling with their oxygen masks, watched in confusion. Their every instinct screamed that salvation lay forward, in the cockpit, where the pilots were supposed to be gods. But David wasn't running forward. He was scrambling down the aisle, pushing past a beverage cart that had come unmoored, moving directly toward the middle of the business class cabin. He stopped at row 8, his knuckles white as he gripped the top of the seat. He leaned down, his voice a desperate, urgent plea that cut through the noise. "Ma'am. Isabella. We need you. Now." He was speaking to the beautiful woman in the silk blouse. The sheer absurdity of the moment was lost on most, but not on Todd, the Wall Street banker. He had managed to get his oxygen mask on and, buoyed by terror-fueled bravado, he ripped it from his face. "Are you kidding me?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Her. What's she gonna do, distract the plane with her perfume?" The insult, crude and sharp, hung in the air. But Isabella didn't even flinch. It was as if Todd and his comment existed in a different dimension, a trivial noise she had already filtered out. Her steel-colored eyes were locked on David Chen's. There was no panic in them. No confusion. Only a silent, profound understanding. With a calmness that was utterly terrifying in its incongruity, she handed her treasured book of poetry to the stunned passenger beside her. She then reached into her carry-on bag and, in one fluid motion, swapped her elegant loafers for a pair of simple, rubber-soled flats. The action was small, practical, and spoke of a forethought that was chillingly out of place. She stood. The cabin was a tunnel of chaos, but in her space, there was an aura of absolute control. She gave David a single, sharp nod. Then she began to walk toward the cockpit. Her walk was not hurried. It was a steady, powerful glide, her shoulders back, her chin up. The panicked passengers in the aisle seemed to part before her like the Red Sea, their terrified gazes following this impossible figure, this vision of serene beauty walking calmly into the heart of the apocalypse. The cockpit of Flight 582 was a scene from hell. A symphony of alarms blared in a dozen different tones, each one a shriek of mechanical death. Red and amber lights flashed across the panels, painting the cramped space in the colors of catastrophe. The first officer was slumped forward in his seat, unconscious, a victim of the initial rapid depressurization. Captain Thorne was still conscious, but barely. His face was a ghastly shade of gray, his hands locked onto the control yoke in a death grip, his body trembling as he fought the creeping effects of hypoxia. He was trying to fly a plane that was actively fighting him, a rogue autopilot system making erratic, fatal corrections. The door swung open and Isabella stepped inside. She didn't gasp. She didn't hesitate. She entered the cockpit not as a passenger, but as a commander entering her domain. Her eyes scanned the entire chaotic array of instruments in a single, sweeping glance, absorbing the flood of data with an inhuman speed. The flashing lights and screaming alarms were not chaos to her, they were a language, and she was fluent. Before David Chen, who had followed her in, could even speak, her hands were a blur. With the confident precision of a surgeon, she reached across the center console, her fingers finding a small, guarded switch. She flipped it. The autopilot override warning vanished. The violent, erratic bucking of the aircraft immediately softened into a more stable, though still terrifying, powerless glide. She had silenced the ghost in the machine. Her hands moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. She slapped the oxygen selector to emergency, forcing pure O2 into the captain's mask. She scanned the engine readouts, the hydraulic pressure gauges, the electrical system schematic on a secondary display. Her fingers danced across the control panel, rerouting auxiliary power, silencing non-critical alarms, and bringing a semblance of order to the digital chaos. In less than 10 seconds, she had assessed the situation more completely than the overwhelmed crew had in minutes. Captain Thorne, his mind clearing slightly with the fresh oxygen, stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. David Chen, clinging to the doorway for support, finally found his voice. It was a ragged whisper, filled with a hope so fragile it was almost painful. "My God, who are you?" Isabella didn't look up from her work. Her full attention was on nursing the dying aircraft, her hands moving, trimming the controls to maintain their precious altitude. Her voice, when it came, was as calm and steady as a heartbeat, a blade of pure composure cutting through the fear. "Isabella Rossi," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Former United States Air Force. 4th Fighter Wing." She paused, her finger tapping a gauge showing 0 hydraulic pressure in System B. "I was a WSO and emergency operations instructor on the F-15E Strike Eagle." She finally turned her head slightly, her steel-gray eyes meeting David's in the dim, flashing light. "My job," she stated, enunciating each word with cold precision, "was to get a $200 million jet and 2 pilots home safely after taking a missile hit with both engines on fire." The statement landed in the ravaged cockpit with the force of a physical blow. The title, Weapons Systems Officer, was an understatement. A Wizzo in an F-15 is the master of the machine, the mission commander, the one who fights the battle from the back seat. David Chen stared at her, at the impossible woman in the silk blouse. The stunning exterior, the serene demeanor, it was all camouflage. Beneath it was a warrior, forged in the most demanding crucible on earth. The fragile hope in his chest didn't just stabilize, it ignited into a blazing certainty. They weren't going to die. Not with her in control. With Captain Thorne now serving as a semi-conscious co-pilot, following her commands with the dazed recognition of a fellow professional, Isabella assumed absolute command. The cockpit, once a chamber of chaos, transformed into a focused command center. Her presence had rewritten the very atmosphere. "Airspeed is our life," she said, her voice a calm anchor in the storm. "We trade altitude for speed. Don't let it bleed off." She scanned the navigation displays. Their current trajectory, a long, slow arc towards the ocean's surface, was a death sentence. Commercial airports were too far. She needed a long, wide runway, equipped for military-grade emergencies. Her mind, a finely tuned computer, sifted through a mental map of the North Atlantic. There was only one viable option. "We're not going to Heathrow," she announced. "Get me a chart for the UK East Coast. We're aiming for RAF Lakenheath. They have a 12,000-foot runway and the best crash fire rescue teams in Europe. It's our only shot." David, now acting as her impromptu flight engineer, relayed the information while fumbling for the charts. Back in the passenger cabin, the transformation was no less profound. The raw panic had subsided, replaced by a stunned, breath-held silence. Every passenger was turned towards the front, their eyes fixed on the cockpit door as if it were the gate to salvation. The rumors had spread like wildfire, whispered from row to row. The beautiful woman in the silk blouse, was flying the plane. Todd, the Wall Street banker, sat rigid in his seat. The color had drained from his face, leaving a pasty, clammy sheen of terror and shame. His earlier, ugly words echoed in his own mind, a monument to his foolish, arrogant prejudice. He had looked at Isabella Rossi and seen an object. Now, he and every other soul on this flight depended entirely on the skill that lay hidden beneath that beautiful surface. His life was in the hands of the woman he had dismissed. It was a humbling, terrifying revelation. Isabella, meanwhile, was fighting a battle of physics and willpower. With the grace of a conductor, she manipulated the flight controls, making tiny, precise adjustments to the flaps and ailerons, coaxing the powerless, 300-ton behemoth into the most efficient glide possible. She took the radio headset from the captain. With her thumb, she keyed the microphone. Her voice, transmitted into the void, was devoid of any tremor, any hint of fear. It was pure, professional authority. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. London Control, this is Transatlantic Air Flight 582. A voice, crisp with a British accent, came back instantly. 582, we show you far off your flight path and descending rapidly. What is your situation? London Control, Isabella replied, her cadence perfect. Flight 582 is experiencing a complete, dual-engine failure. Both pilots are incapacitated. The aircraft is under the command of a certified pilot in the cabin. We are a heavy Boeing 777, currently gliding. We are unable to maintain altitude and are declaring an emergency. Requesting immediate vectors and priority clearance for a dead-stick landing at RAF Lakenheath. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. The air traffic controller, a veteran of 1,000 routine flights, was processing the impossible. 582, did you say, a pilot from the cabin? The voice stammered, laced with disbelief. Ma'am, for the record, please state your name and qualifications. The demand hung in the air, a final, bureaucratic hurdle in a situation that had long since left the rulebook behind. The world was questioning her, even as she was trying to save it. As the London controller awaited her credentials, his doubt a palpable weight over the airwaves, the emergency frequency was suddenly split open by a new voice. It was a voice that radiated pure, undiluted authority, deep, American, and utterly confident. It was the sound of command. London Control, this is Colonel Jax Price, Commander, United States Air Force 4th Fighter Wing, calling from Seymour Johnson. Every controller in the London facility froze. It was like a thunderclap in a library. I confirm, the colonel's voice boomed, cutting through the static like a laser, that Captain Isabella Rossi, retired, is flying your aircraft. She is the most qualified emergency operations pilot I have ever trained. Her command authority is absolute. He paused, letting the weight of his rank settle. Give her anything she wants. The sky is hers. Out. The transmission ended. For a full 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. The voice of God had spoken. The doubt vanished, vaporized by the authority of a U.S. Air Force colonel vouching for one of his own. The London controller's voice returned, now stripped of all hesitation, replaced with crisp, urgent cooperation. Flight 582, I copy. Colonel, your transmission is received. Ma'am, you are cleared for unrestricted emergency approach to RAF Lakenheath. You have absolute priority. All civilian and military traffic is being cleared from your path. Fire crash rescue is standing by. The runway is yours. Solid copy, London, Isabella replied, her voice unchanged. 582 is beginning final approach configuration. The battle was now between her, the airplane, and gravity. The runway at Lakenheath appeared through the windscreen, a distant, perfect strip of dark gray against the green fields of England. It looked impossibly small. "Gear down," she commanded. Captain Thorne, now her devoted co-pilot, reached over and lowered the landing gear lever. The aircraft shuddered as the massive wheels dropped into the screaming wind, adding immense drag. The nose pitched down. "Don't chase it," Isabella said, her voice a low murmur, more to herself than to him. Her hands and feet moved in a seamless, fluid dance, compensating for the drag, keeping the glide path perfect. The runway grew larger, wider. The numbers on the threshold became visible. The red and white approach lights told her she was perfectly on slope. She was treating the 300-ton passenger jet like the fighter it was never meant to be, using energy management principles learned in the most hostile skies on Earth. The ground rushed up to meet them. For a moment, it seemed they were too fast, that they would shatter on impact. Then, with breathtaking grace, she pulled back gently on the yoke. The aircraft's nose rose in a flare, converting its forward speed into a final moment of lift. The 777 seemed to float, suspended inches above the tarmac. The main landing gear kissed the concrete. It wasn't a slam. It wasn't a crash. It was a soft, gentle touchdown, a whisper of rubber on asphalt at over 150 miles per hour, dead on the runway's centerline. The nose will settled moments later. The powerless aircraft rolled down the vast runway, the only sounds the rumble of its tires and the relieved, hysterical sobbing that finally broke out in the cabin behind her. It came to a complete stop with thousands of feet of runway to spare. In the cockpit, there was only the sound of Isabella's steady breathing and the fading whine of the emergency electronics. She had done it. She had brought them home. The moment the 777's engine spooled down into silence, the world outside exploded. A sea of flashing red and blue lights converged on the aircraft. Fire trucks, ambulances, and official vehicles swarmed the tarmac. The emergency stairs were connected with frantic speed. When the cabin door opened, the first people on board were paramedics and military officials. They found a cabin of weeping, stunned passengers, giving a spontaneous, thunderous ovation directed at the cockpit door. Isabella was one of the last to leave. She had put her sunglasses back on, a mask of cool anonymity. She had pulled the collar of her sapphire blouse up, an unconscious gesture of shielding herself from the circus that awaited. As she descended the stairs, the press cameras flashed, capturing blurry images of the mystery woman, the angel of Flight 582. She ignored them all. Her gaze was fixed straight ahead. A uniformed Air Force officer met her at the bottom of the stairs, saluted her crisply, and escorted her to an official black car, which whisked her away before a single reporter could shout a question. In the days that followed, the story was a global sensation. But her name was never officially released. Within the closed circles of aviation, however, her legend was born. On restricted online forums, accessible only to certified military and commercial pilots, the threads were electric. The Lakenheath deadstick? I knew it had to be Rossi. Her emergency simulator records at Seymour were the stuff of myths. They said she could land a brick if you gave her enough air. Flew with her once. Said less than 20 words the whole flight. Just watched. Now I know what she was watching for. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived at her London flat, delivered by military courier, not the Royal Mail. Inside, there was no request for an interview or a formal report. There was only a single sheet of official letterhead with a handwritten note. Isabella. Some pilots fly with clearance. You fly with competence. Glad to see you haven't lost your touch. Welcome home. Jax. She never spoke of the flight. She granted no interviews. She returned to her quiet life, finding solace in poetry and anonymity. But the world of aviation did not forget. A quiet, unwritten rule seemed to ripple through the global airline industry. Months later, booking a routine flight from Paris to Rome, she purchased a standard economy ticket. At the gate, the agent scanned her passport, looked up at her with a flicker of recognition, then back down at her screen. Without a word, she printed a new boarding pass and handed it to Isabella. "We've had a last-minute change, Ms. Rossi. We've placed you in 2A. First class." It happened again on her next flight. And the one after that. No matter what ticket she bought, her name in the system triggered a silent, automatic, and complimentary upgrade. It was never announced, never explained. It was the aviation world's quiet, permanent salute, a shared secret, a nod of ultimate respect to the queen who wore a silk blouse as her uniform, and who had once, in the cold, empty sky over the Atlantic, reminded them all what a true pilot was. If you believe a person's worth is defined by their competence, not their cover, please share this story. In the comments below, write, "Competence is the only uniform," and tell us if you've ever witnessed quiet skill silence a loud room. Please, always comment with respect for everyone's experiences. And for more stories about the hidden heroes among us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.